Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/wehaveways.
This episode is brought to you by JLL. Get an insider view into the world of commercial real estate with JLL's podcast, Trends and Insights, the Future of Commercial Real Estate. Whether you're curious about making cities more sustainable, the evolution of office space, or AI opportunities, this podcast will help keep you a step ahead. Tune in for candid conversations with business leaders about the biggest trends impacting how we live, work, and play. Subscribe to Trends and Insights now at jll.com/podcast.
Do you want to stay up to date with the messiest drama on the internet? Or what about those crazy viral challenges? Then be sure to tune in to TMZ Verified, the podcast. I'm Wild.
I'm Steph.
And each week we're either breaking down the spicy viral stories or we're hanging out with the most popular influencers around. Tana Mojo is in the building.
I don't even know if they're hating. They're probably just telling the truth, but we love the haters too.
Sophia Franklin.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk, but like, let's be real with each other, you know?
Bryce Hall is here, y'all. Make some noise, people.
I'm single, by the way.
Right.
So if you like viral drama, influencer culture, and just overall hot messiness, check out new episodes of TMZ Verified every Thursday right here on Spotify.
Love the way you look this wedding season at Men's Warehouse. With the range of sizes from extra small to big and tall. Explore top styles at prices for any budget, including designer suit and tux rentals starting at just $159. With over 600 locations, in-store consultations, and easy online booking, there's a reason why couples choose Men's Warehouse to find their perfect fit. Men's Warehouse. Love the way you look.
This air operation today is the most important air operation yet conducted in this war. The target must be destroyed. It is of vital importance to the enemy, your friends and comrades that have been lost and that will be lost today depending on you. Their sacrifice must not be in vain. Good luck, good shooting, and good bombing. That was General Fred Anderson of 8th Bomber Command, the US 8th Air Force of the US Army Air Force, talking about mission number 115, Schweinfurt, again, Thursday, the 14th of October, 1943. Hello, and welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray and James Holland, the Second World War podcast for all your Second World War needs. Now, Jim.
Or indeed World War II needs, if you're
well, yeah, if you're
of the
World War II. Or, you know, if you're Russian Great Patriotic War, because you're only in the one, weren't you? Right, so
nothing else happened. It's only happening on the Eastern Front.
Yeah, nothing to see there. But welcome. And what we've decided to do is do a series of podcasts to talk about the campaign and the war of the US 8th Air Force. The mighty 8th, who will be cropping up in a TV program on your iPhone. I mean, but don't watch it on your iPhone. Watch it on a great big television if you possibly can.
Yeah, go as big as you can.
Go as big as you can. If you're rich enough to rent an IMAX and stream it from your phone to the IMAX, if you can make the screen mirroring work,
or even better, go to the Sphere in Las Vegas.
You go to the Sphere in Las Vegas and watch it there. Although I imagine the Sphere is so. Anyway, we've distracted ourselves.
Whatever.
Here. What we want to do is do a series of podcasts about their campaign, about their highs and lows from their inception, the thinking behind the campaign, which is really, really important in how it influenced and shaped its progress.
Well, I think the other thing about it is that in the narrative, the sort of in your mind's eye, you're thinking, bomber streams of B-17s and machine guns rattling and Fokker Wolves coming towards it, and then a bit of downtime at the air base in East Anglia, and it kind of feels all very sort of linear, and of course it isn't. There's all sorts of swings and roundabouts, and different scales as the war progresses, and all sorts of stuff, and lots of different factors into it, which I suspect the vast majority of people just are not aware of.
The thing I'd like to say is, having been reading in preparation for this, I always slightly used to think, and obviously
both Bomber Command's campaign and the 8th and the 17th bomber campaigns. It's a terrifying business, but I always used to think at least the guys in the daylight bombing could see the German fighters coming. They at least had that, right? And I used to think the poor sods in Bomber Command, something creeps up on them in the night, and maybe they see it, maybe they don't, and they've only got 303 machine guns to deal with it, and it's so I used to think that the balance of terror, if I had to pick it for the crews, sat with the Bomber Command crews. But having been reading about this, I'm beginning to change my mind.
Yeah, no, it's pretty bad.
I'm not so sure that seeing the swarms of Focke-Wulf FW-190s coming at me is that much better than not being able to see them coming at me. You know what I mean, Jim?
Yeah, no, completely. It is utterly terrifying.
Yeah, it's the crews and
these very young men who are sent over and spend, every time they go on a mission, they're spending, 2/3 of that mission just in a state of heightened tension and frankly terror, that knowing that the chances are they're going to get shot down at some point. It is literally only a matter of time. And the statistics by October 1943 are appalling, but we'll come on to all that. And the other thing I should just say is that you can listen to this series twice a week when they normally get transmitted on a Tuesday and a Thursday, or you can sign up to the kind of gold standard and get them ad-free and all at once if you choose to.
As one gigantic digestible lump. I'm going to say it's a digestible lump.
It's a very digestible lump.
But so the US 8th Air Force, they fly their last raid on, I think, April the 24th, 1945, don't they? They fly their last combat sorties. So 18 months before that, they fly Black Thursday, probably the nadir
Mission
of their
number 115. Yeah.
The nadir of their fortunes, the second Schweinfurt raid on the 14th of October, 1943. And I think there is this, always in a war or in a big campaign like this, there is a sort of game of, one side takes the advantage and the thing swings backwards and forwards, not necessarily
the pendulum
evenly.
Going back and forth.
But not necessarily like a pendulum, because sometimes it'll take the full swing one way and then only like a quarter swing the other. There's no symmetry to this pendulum, so the pendulum is not the best analogy. But the point is, if you were to look at the state of the 8th Air Force and what it's capable of on the 14th of October 1943, match and see how its ambitions match its abilities, you would not expect the Air Force that downs tools in April of 1945, would you?
No, the transformation is absolutely enormous, and it's really important to stress that Black Thursday is called Black Thursday for a reason. And at the end of it, well, we're sort of jumping the gun here, but at the end of it, the whole strategy for the Mighty Eight daylight bombing campaign, which is effectively the United States Army Air Force bombing campaign in Europe, is in tatters, and it is a moment of deep crisis. But we should go back to it, and why on that morning. This is the bit that you read out earlier on. Is Fred Anderson? He's the commander of 8th Bomber Command, which is one of the kind of sort of subdivisions of the 8th Air Force, which at this point is commanded by Lieutenant General Ira Eaker. And Fred Anderson knows that this mission is a tough one, and it's come at the end of a week of very, very intense bomber missions deep into the heart of the Reich. So this is not milk runs into France to hit the marshalling yards at Rouen. This is not kind of even the Ruhr. This is much deeper into Germany, which comes with a whole host of problems, which we'll explain. And the fact of the matter is, the last time the 8th Air Force went to Schweinfurt,
well, this is the important
was on
bit.
the 17th of August. And that was the first Schweinfurt raid, where they also at the same time attacked Regensburg, which is not a million miles away. 315 bombers, 60 shot down, 600 aircrew lost, 11 further aircraft scrapped, and 164 damaged. So 1/3 of the attacking force was written off. Now you imagine that's in 3 raids. You've lost your entire force at that rate of attrition. So as you can imagine, no one is very keen to go back to Schweinfurt.
The big part of the problem with the first raid, wasn't it, is there were 2 bomber streams that were supposed to fly together and swamp the German defences. And the weather interfered with that plan, so they were sent in separate waves. So the Germans had time and the luxury of the time to regroup and attack the second wave with its fighter defences when they then showed up. So the 8th took a colossal morning. Schweinfurt, for those who don't know, is sort of halfway between Frankfurt and Nuremberg, a little north of that, but so well into Germany. I mean, deep in Germany, 2 hours beyond the Ruhr, which is their normal sort of industrial target flight, and deep in Germany. And the reason they're going there is they're going there for ball bearings, isn't it, Jim?
It is. And ball bearings are vital in, they're a vital component of bomber parts and indeed fighter parts. Let's say fighter parts, but certainly bomber parts and indeed tanks and all sorts of things. Anything that needs to rotate,
anything with an axle.
Anything with an axle, you need ball bearings. So that is why it's important. And the problem is you're going in unescorted. And that's the issue. So fighter escorts at this time in October 1943 can take you so far. They can take you to kind of the edge of the Ruhr, the edge of Germany, but they can't take you deep into Germany. And the problem is that despite being in these bombers would go over in a formation. Imagine a kind of a convoy going across the Atlantic. It's a bit like that. And they've all got, each bomber, whether it be a B-24 Liberator or whether it be a B-17 Flying Fortress, has got 13 50 caliber guns in it. So that's collectively, that's huge. And the theory beforehand was that this would be enough.
Let's do the raid.
And we'll follow one particular crew, I think.
Yeah. So no one wants to go back to Schweinfurt. Put it that way.
Put it mildly.
No one's keen. So 92nd Bomber Group, they're based in Poddington near Wellingborough, and having gone to school in Bedford, there's all of these old stations around there, and so a lot of these names suddenly, when you read about the 8th Air Force, if you having known that bit, the one then known a little bit around Bury Stemmons as well, these names just pop up. The villages where, of course, that's what that gigantic flat farm is with a hangar.
Yes,
right?
Yes, exactly.
That explains that. So 92nd Bomber Group, they've been there. They've came in 1942, the previous year. They're one of the first to join the US 8th Air Force, and they've been held back from going to North Africa because one of the things that happens to the bomber campaign is that because of Torch, they're needed in North Africa all of a sudden, and so the bomber campaign in Britain is denuded. 8th Air Force is denuded of some of its resources. And you have a Lieutenant J. Kemp McLaughlin, Jim, to tell the story of this raid. Who is he?
Well, he's 24 years old. He's from Braxton County in West Virginia. And he's one of the ones that isn't posted to North Africa following the Torch landings in November 1942. Rather, he and his crew helped to set up the first 11th Combat Crew Replacement Centre. So this is crews coming in. And what happens is you arrive in England. Quite often you would fly in a B-17 or a B-24. That would then be handed over straight to a squadron. You then go to a replacement centre, waiting to be allocated a bomb group and indeed a bomb squadron within that. So he's doing that. He's doing instructions and all the rest of it. But he's then sent back to the 92nd in May 1943. And in early July, McLaughlin's transferred to the 326th Bomb Squadron within the 92nd Bomb Group. So what happens is you have 3 bomb squadrons within each bomb group, with a new crew and a new ship, which he calls Fame's Favoured Few. And it's very much the American way to name all your, Bomber Command has G for George.
But Fame's Favoured Few, I imagine, does it have a busty young quasi-pornographic picture on the side of it? Or
it seems very likely, doesn't it?
Well, it does, but it also sounds like a sort of this is a sort of Shining Liberty style of American plane name rather than Gal Back Home.
That
style.
Lil Doll.
They tend to fall into two categories, don't they?
They do.
It's either shining bright or it's like up all night. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Exactly that. So your squadron is then divided into flights, and he's a flight leader. So he's one of the senior bods, and they were one of the leading bombers for Schweinfurt 1 on the 17th of August, but. Actually, whether you have a really tough time or whether you have a really bad time usually depends on your position in the formation. And the dud position is being at the bottom of the formation. That's where you absolutely don't want to be.
The back and the bottom.
Back and the bottom. So the higher you are, generally speaking, you're kind of okay. Not okay, but you've got a better chance. So he has a comparatively time, but he's certainly not. He knows all about how bad it was the first time round, and he's definitely not up for an F1. And he said, we all knew that we'd be going back to his target at some point, and each of us hoped not to be selected for that raid, but. He's put on alert the previous day, the 13th of October, but not at that point told the target. And the weather's terrible. There's this huge blanket of cloud over the Channel and Northwest Europe. And he's really, really hoping it's going to be scrubbed because no one wants to go out in bad weather either. It's just as, forget where the target is. going out in bad weather is really bad because it's incredibly dangerous when you take off into Tente's cloud. Because what you have to do is you have to climb and climb and climb until you get out of the cloud base, and then you form up in a big, you circle around, and there's a forming up plane which is usually coloured sort of orange with pink spots or whatever, and that's so everyone can see it. And you form up on that, and then you get into your formation, and then you start going across.
So
the North
what we're
Sea.
talking about is scores of aircraft flying through cloud with other
where they can't see one another.
Where they can't see one another. All climbing at different rates. No one knows how fast anyone else is flying or where anyone else is. I mean, I don't know, Jim. You've done a fair bit of light aircraft flying in your time, I imagine.
Yeah.
My brother-in-law used to have a plane, and I remember once I can't remember. We'd gone somewhere and we were coming back, and he said, I was sat in the co-pilot seat, and he goes, "Okay, all you really got to do is keep your eyes peeled. If you see anything, just tell me. That's just if you see any other aircraft, just let me know. I'll know where they are from the air traffic control. I ought to, but if you see anything, just tell me, and then we've got eyes on whatever there is, right?" So we took off 2,000 feet, went into cloud, and it's literally it's like white on the windscreen. It's like
yes,
like
you literally can't see anything.
Literally can't see anything, and I'm thinking, well, if there's anything out there, and we fly into it, we'll never even know. So I sat there like as white as the cloud because I hadn't prepared myself for it, in total terror until 10 minutes later, up we popped up out the cloud or wherever, or we exited the cloud the other end. But it's that thing, so scale that up to a great big, and of course aircraft are less safe. The other thing to remember is aircraft are a lot less safe back then than they are now.
Well, and they're huge, and they're full of fuel and bombs.
Well, they're huge, and they're full of fuel, and they're full of bombs. And all these multipliers. So I mean, you're absolutely right. Even leaving the airbase is dangerous. Going through the cloud is dangerous. Forming up is dangerous. And this is long before we even think about the Luftwaffe.
Anyway, so he's hoping it's going to be scrubbed, but it isn't. Early breakfast, powdered eggs and bacon. Truck pulls up, takes the officers to the briefing room. And this is like a sort of classic village hall. It's got the stage at the end with the screen. It's got the, the board. It's got the little curtains which hide the map, which shows them where they're going to be. And they never do it. They dramatically pull the curtain back when they're going to reveal what the mission is, rather than people coming in and seeing it. Sort of rows of fold-away chairs, that kind of thing, a hubbub, everyone's smoking.
That's for crowd control reasons as much as anything else, hiding the target. Rather, they're not thinking that some little old lady in the village might be cycling by and then
no.
Go to her radio set in her loft and
No, it's because what they want everyone there, everyone watching. They want everyone's attention, and then they want to do it. So the intelligence officer goes, "Gentlemen, may I have your attention? This morning we have quite a show." And then he pulls back the curtain to reveal a large map with a plotted route, with a little sort of red thread going across it. It's Schweinfurt again.
Son of a bitch! This is my 25th mission!
What the hell are you crying about? This is my first!
There you go.
Which is what happens. So the silence, and then all the bitching and groans and whistles and all the rest of it. But McLaughlin's kind of, he goes, okay, well, it's Schweinfurt, but he's an old hand at this point. So what he's much more interested in is, what's the intelligence brief on this? What can they expect? What's the route? What's the likely enemy? What's the likely escort going to be? And at this point, the intelligence officer then gives a full briefing. So P-47s would escort them to the Ruhr. Well, great, over the bit where there's not many Germans to worry about. And then they'd be on their way, their own, until the return leg, when the Thunderbolts would rejoin them northeast of Paris. Oh, well, that's all right then.
At which point the Luftwaffe piss off. I mean,
yes. Yeah. So it's sort of complete points. In other words, they've got 400 miles each way and 2 hours of flying on their own each leg. So that's 4 hours of flying, whatever. No, 2 hours of flying.
2 hours
on their own.
Jim, that's plenty.
That's plenty. Yeah. So over the target, this is what they can expect: 380 anti-aircraft guns firing 12 rounds per minute. So that equates to 50,000 shells in the main formation from the start of the IP, which is the initial point. So the initial point is the point on their kind of map, so sort of imaginary moment in the sky where they start the bomb run. And at the bomb run, what you have to do is a pilot hands over control to the bombardier, who's in the nose in the case of the B-17. And switches over to the automatic pilot. And the automatic pilot keeps the plane trimmed and throttled at a certain level so it can fly straight and level. Because obviously when you're actually releasing your bombs, you need to be as calm and straight and and level as you can possibly be.
This is an in-theatre innovation because bombing accuracy hasn't been what it should be. So the idea is that one guy aims, so they all aim together, rather than everyone has a punt.
Right, exactly that.
That has not been working. And they're flying straight and level. The Germans eventually, in response to that change in tactic, now fire like a predicted box of ACAT fire, don't they?
Yes.
So they're not trying to shoot individual aircraft down. They're just trying to create like a box of flak that they know that the Americans will have to fly.
All exploding at different heights.
All exploding at different heights in predicted patterns.
So roughly, so say for argument's sake, it would be between sort of 17,000 and 22,000 feet over a stretch of, say, 2 miles or something, whatever it is, of 3 miles, 5 miles maybe.
Over where they know they're going to be flying straight and level. Because the first time the Americans fly straight and level it on the bomb aimer, don't they? It completely bamboozles the Germans and they aren't up to it. But the thing that we'll keep coming back to is that there's ceaseless, relentless adaptation, responsive adaptation. And it's literally evolution, because if you fail, you die. And if you don't evolve, you die. So it's literally how evolution in action, this. But conceptually.
Absolutely.
Evolution.
So in addition to the 50,000 shells and 380 anti-aircraft guns, they're also likely to be met by 700 single-engine fighters and 400 twin-engine.
So, Jim, just remind everyone, how many aircraft are flying to Schweinfurt?
Like 300 and something.
So they're outnumbered
3-1, 4-1.
At least.
4-1, yeah. Yep. And the 92nd Bomb Group is going to be is to lead their wing, which is part of the 1st Division. So the 8th Air Force is divided into 3 divisions: 1st, 2nd, 3rd. 2nd is B-24 Liberators, and the 1st and 3rd are B-17s. And fame's favoured few is going to be the lead ship. At this point, Colonel Bud Peasley is introduced. Now, he's the former commanding officer of the
Bud
308.
Peasley, how you doing?
Bud Peasley, how you doing, guys?
How you doing, guys?
He's the former CEO of the 384th Bomb Group and now Chief of Staff of the 40th Wing.
I used to be the commanding officer of the 384th. And now I'm Chief of Staff of the 40th Wing. I want to come on the party.
There you go.
He doesn't talk like that at all.
Does he not?
No. I used to be the CEO of the 384th Bomb Group, but now I am Chief of Staff of the 40th Wing.
Okay, fine.
No, anyway.
That's even better.
He's not from New Jersey.
I don't know.
Whatever. Anyway, no, he's from Virginia.
Right. Okay.
Or Connecticut or something. Anyway, he's going to be flying as McLaughlin's second pilot. So the cloud is still bad.
Why, though? He wants to come along?
Yeah, he wants to come along.
Right.
Wants to check it all out.
So is McLaughlin's co-pilot like basically high-fiving himself in a Nissan Hut at this moment?
No, he ends up being the tail gunner.
Right. Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah. So he's not very happy either. So the cloud is still really bad, but they've got to carry on and assuming it's all going to be right up to the wire. McLaughlin's hoping it's going to be scrubbed, but it isn't. Captain Harry Hughes is his navigator. Lieutenant Ed O'Grady is the bombardier. And when these officers all get to their fort, McLaughlin gets on board, looks at all the crew. They've all got kind of incredibly long faces. No one wants to do this. Everyone knows that this might be their kind of sort of last time on planet Earth, on ground anyway. It's 10-10 cloud, but they go anyway. It's all been planned. They're going to go it, even though the conditions are against them, even though the enemy forces are against them. They're going to go because they've just got to press on. And so at 12 minutes past 10 in the morning, the signal to begin goes, engines whirring into life. Favoured few, as it's the lead ship, opens the throttles, 50 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour, 70 miles an hour, and then around at 100 miles an hour, it's easing into the air, very heavily laden, lots of fuel, lots of bombs, 2.5 tons of bombs, climbs up through the cloud, praying they're not going to crash into someone else. But as the lead ship in their area, obviously that makes their chances a little bit better. They emerge into the clear at about 7,000 feet. And 7,000 feet in a very, very heavy B-17. It's not something that takes, that takes a little while to reach that height. So you've got some very, very anxious moments to start off with. Everyone feeling tense, hearts beating, pumping, and all the rest of it. Circle around, form up, and off they go. See the P-47s, the Thunderbolts, the escorts over the channel.
Forming up's really important, Jim, because the way they operate tactically is based on the idea that they form up.
Yes, in a tight formation. It's exactly like a ship convoy.
Yeah, but if you set off with your formation a bit ragged, you're already, and this is before we argue about whether the tactic works or not, right? You've already got anxiety built into your formation, haven't you? You've got pilots looking over their shoulders. You've got him as the lead bomber thinking, am I going to have to throttle back because Bud at the back, on the back right-hand corner isn't keeping up?
Yep.
You know, or am I going to have to, am I going too slowly and we're in danger of lagging behind, holding the whole formation up? So there's all the formation flying, which of course Bomber Command have completely abandoned ages ago. They fly in a stream, don't they? They don't bother forming up. There's no point. It doesn't help anyone. It's too difficult because they're doing it at night, which is effectively like trying to do it in cloud. The way the Americans are planning to fight relies on the formation. And if the formation isn't formed up properly, obviously you're worrying about that as much as anything else. So, I mean, the responsibility on someone like McLaughlin's shoulders as lead pilot, I mean, it's, how old is he?
It's worth just stressing that the whole point of these formations is that you're tight together, and that you are rather like the box that's of barrage that's coming up, a flak coming towards you. You are also presenting a box of, say you're 315 aircraft times 13 machine guns, and that is supposed, in theory, to make you impregnable. But key to that is not straggling. It's not kind of lagging behind. It's keeping that incredibly tight formation
and making sure you're going pretty quickly, so that if a fighter wants to intercept you, he's got to be really going some, and he's got to climb fast to get above you and all that sort of thing. And
but obviously, when you've got 315. 330 aircraft going through thick cloud up to 7,000 feet. And 10 tenths cloud means that basically there is no gap in the cloud whatsoever. 10 tenths cloud means that the whole sky that you can see in your immediate environment, for as far as you can see, is covered in cloud. So that's a blanket, a complete blanket, basically, is what that means. So kind of 8 temps means, sort of almost, but there's little gaps of sunlight. But
they get to France. Yeah. They cross the Channel. They get to France. The Thunderbolts
get to the edge of France.
The
Thunderbolts bugger off.
Little friends disappear.
Almost immediately, German fighters turn up. So the co-pilot is Lieutenant Augustus Arenholz.
Lieutenant Jim. I mean,
Lieutenant Augustus Arenholz. Large formation approaching at 5 o'clock. He calls out almost immediately. And it's a gaggle of Me-110s, which are twin-engine fighter aircraft. The Zerstörer, the destroyer. And the 110s pass them on their starboard side, that's right-hand side, and then, almost making a mockery of the formation. They just sort of glide past them, overtake them, go on, and then turn. And so the Luftwaffe technique by this stage of the war is to do head-on attacks. That is where they've discovered that the bombers are their most vulnerable, is you just go straight at the pilot. And you're just shooting head on, and you go like you're going to have a head on collision, and then you glide over the top of them. That's basically what you do. As soon as they do that, there's flak, puffs, bangs, clatter of shot. Because what happens is an anti-aircraft gun is programmed to explode, detonate at a certain point, which is how you can have these box barrages. And obviously, when it explodes, bits of metal fly everywhere. Now, if you're going, you can be kind of 100 yards away, and you'll get clattered by little bits of metal. Now, sometimes these go in, sometimes they don't. But, the blast of it also froze it's a bit like sort of heavy turbulence, so you're being knocked about as a...
Well, and a red hot fragment going into your radial engine, it doesn't need a big chunk of metal. It's, something hot going very, very fast will cut through an aluminium aircraft fuselage just like that, and certainly cut through a person. But anyway, so they're attacked, and they've lost 5 of the 16 ships from this 110 attack.
This particular group.
This particular thing. So on they go. They're still only south of the Ruhr. There's another mass attack of 110s coming. I mean, of course, everyone knows the Me-110 in the Battle of Britain is proved to be flabby and useless compared to intercept fighters like the Spitfire and the Hurricane, right? Even the old Mark 1 Spitfire, friend of the show. But the point is the 110 is entirely up to this job of shooting down something bigger and slower than itself, and it's much more heavily armed as well because it's flying with cannon, isn't it?
Yes, you don't need agility when you're flying against you don't need to be doing pirouettes.
Bomb formation that's not going to take evasive action. That's the other thing. They are not going to take evasive action.
Very little evasive action.
Or as little as they possibly can, because it'll disrupt the formation, it'll disrupt the bomb pattern, it'll disrupt the point of the raid. Anyway, so another lot come in, and then 109s join in.
Yep. The fort on their right is piloted by Major George Ott, and McLaughlin notices that in Ott's ship, First one engine's on fire, then a second. The B-17 falls back. 9 parachutes he sees, but Ott, the pilot, is still flying on. And whether that he may have been killed, he might not have been killed, he might jump out later, but that's the last that McLaughlin sees of him. So he, who knows?
That's that.
Yeah. But that's one on their immediate right has gone.
Yeah. Then 2 Ju-88s are called by Sergeant Edison in the top turret, and they take evasive action, and 2 rockets explode where they've been because the Germans are firing rockets into the bomber formations, which again I think is a sign of how a great big static formation of bombers maybe offers you a target you don't need necessarily sharp shooting for. It's the other thing. I mean, that's the we're going to get to how they've ended up flying like this eventually. Sergeant Van Horn then calls out that Lieutenant Clough's fort has been hit, is on fire. A wing then blew off. 2 parachutes. More ME-118s.
Presumably have gone down. Yeah,
exactly. And they're nowhere near Schweinfurt. Because Schweinfurt, after all, is another hour on from the Ruhr, isn't it? So Peasley,
crikey,
having joined this come for the joyride, turns to McLaughlin and says, "Captain, I think we've had it."
Yeah, he's Clint Eastwood.
Yeah, exactly.
Captain, I think we've had it.
And McLaughlin has never felt more scared in his life. He orders the formation to close up. One of the orders the group, everyone to close up. One formation of 16 only has 4 aircraft left in it.
So 8 gone already. I mean, it's just amazing, isn't it? No, what's that? 12 gone.
The box isn't working and it doesn't exist anymore. I mean, it's horrendous. Then they get to the sky's clear and they get to Schweinfurt.
Because what happens is these fighter attacks come in waves. Because they've only got limited fuel, particularly the 109s. And so they might attack for kind of 20 minutes, something like that, and then they go off to their bases again. And so then you have a kind of comparatively clear run. But obviously, the moment you get closer to the target, by this point, the Germans are tracking every movement. Because it's one big solid block, it's very easy to follow on radar and indeed by observers, because you're taking a massive stretch of the sky, so everyone can see you, but maybe not if it's 10% cloud over this part. But do you know what I mean? I mean, it's quite easy to track. So they can expect more fighters when they get to Schweinfurt.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, they've run a gauntlet already. They get to Schweinfurt. Then there's lots of flak, but mercy of mercies, it's not accurate. Of course, the fighters in the meantime, they've gone to refuel, have a cup of coffee, and get ready to come back, haven't they? It's the real point. So if the flak's accurate or not doesn't matter. Also, the bomber force has been degraded to the point where they're going to drop some bombs, but how bad's it going to go? And also, the Germans are well in the habit of being bombed now, so they've got plenty of measures in place. And the Americans also, compared to what Bomber Command are dropping lighter bombs. Their bomb payloads are nowhere near as sophisticated as bomber commands are by this stage of the war. So they're not necessarily dropping a thing that blows a roof off that then they can rain incendiaries in, like Bomber Command did in July in Hamburg, where they've got a sophisticated combined bombing. Basically the British are much more bloodthirsty about this entire thing at this stage of the war. Anyway, they get there. No one speaks. Okay, great, O'Grady, it's all yours. And he hands over control of the aircraft to the bombardier, which I think is the most. I always think this is incredible that that's how it.
You switch on the AFCE, which is the automatic flight control equipment, which is effectively kind of automatic pilot. And this means that he can use the Nordon bomb sight, which is incredibly sophisticated kit, and more of that later, as they fly over. But one of the problems is that the pilot still has, it's not like you can take sort of 40 winks during this moment.
There they are, the ball bearing plant, bombs away, says O'Grady. And then McLaughlin says,
"We've flown this far for Uncle Sam. From here we fly to the US. For us." And this is a line that is absolutely lifted 100% into Memphis Belle.
Fair enough. It's an amazing line.
But it was McLaughlin who said it originally. But I'm sure quite a few people said it, to be fair. But anyway, the moment they turn off, I mean, the good thing is that once you have dropped your bombs, you can forget any more flying straight and level. You can climb higher if you want to. You're lighter, so you're faster. So on paper, you have a few advantages that you didn't have on the run in. But the flip side of that is your formation is less. It's less, cohesively together, because you're turning and you've done the run and you've been through the flak and all the rest of it. So you're still incredibly vulnerable. And 2 minutes, literally 2 minutes in, they're kind of they're left alone for kind of 10 minutes, but then the enemy turn up again, and it's kind of yet more fighters attacking them. And by this point, 10 minutes into the return leg, McLaughlin reckons that at least half their force is gone as far as he can see. And they're still 1 hour, 38 minutes from when their little friends are rejoining, which is the fighter planes. But on they go, repeated attacks, but miraculously they're lucky that day. Over France, enemy fighters broke off, but then there's absolutely no sign of the Thunderbolts whatsoever. And it turns out that they've been grounded by fog. So they haven't even got escorts on the way back. And of course, that's doubly bad because not only are they not protected by the fighters on the final bit, the reason that they're not there is because it's fog, and the fog they then have to land through.
Yeah.
At least when you're taking off, as long as you keep climbing, you're going to emerge into the clear. But the problem is with when you're descending into fog, you don't know where the land is. I mean, you've got your artificial horizon, you've got your altimeter and everything, but how reliable is that?
So eventually they make it back to Poddington via radio fixes. A long, tough, soul-searching day. What's the butcher's bill, as we put it, before we go to the break?
Well, the 305th Bomb Group loses 13 out of 16. The 306th Bomb Group loses 10 out of 18. The 97th, 379th, and 384th Bomb Groups all lose 6 crews. In total, 60 fortresses, which is exactly the same number that was lost on Schweinfurt 1. Exactly the same number. And 594 men either killed in action or missing in action, and 40, in addition to that, wounded in action. A further 7 fortresses are written off and 138 damaged. And the truth of the matter is that the mighty 8th has lost 148 bombers in the 7 days of operations up to Black Thursday, which is getting on for kind of half their force. It's certainly kind of two-fifths.
Incredible.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is catastrophic levels.
It's absolutely catastrophic.
But Kemp McLaughlin does live to see another day.
Oh, brilliant. Well, we're going to take a quick break and then we'll come back to
how they've got to this point, really.
How they got to this point and how this point is digested. We'll see in a tick.
TaxAct knows you don't look forward to taxes. TaxAct doesn't even look forward to taxes, and TaxAct is a tax software company. It's basically TaxAct's whole thing. If TaxAct did things over, maybe TaxAct would end up teaching kindergarten or leading fly fishing tours. But that's a different story for a different ad. So why don't we just agree that taxes aren't fun, but you still have to do them? TaxAct's filing software can help you do that. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.
Crypto is like finance, but different. It doesn't care when you invest, trade, or save. Do it on weekends, or at 5 a.m., or on Christmas Day at 5 a.m. Crypto is finance for everyone, everywhere, all the time. Visit kraken.com/see-what-crypto-can-be to learn more. Not investment advice. Crypto trading involves risk of loss. Cryptocurrency services are provided to U.S. and U.S. territory customers by Payward Ventures, Inc. View PVI's disclosures at kraken.com/legal/disclosures.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold! Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. We've just done the Schweinfurt 2 raid. We hope that was as hair-raising it ought to be. I mean, it is...
it's just terrifying to think about.
It's just horrendous. I mean,
really
that's just Charge of the Light Brigade stuff, isn't it, Jim?
Every single time, yes, but people who were on the Charge of the Light Brigade did it once.
Yes, that's true.
These guys have to do it 25 times, unless they're killed beforehand, obviously.
If they're lucky, they get to do it 25 times, yeah. So Eaker's the Commander-in-Chief of 8th Air Force.
Apparently pronounced Aker.
Really?
We Brits want to call him Eaker, but apparently it's Aker.
Ira Aker. Okay, well, we'll
and Spots.
accept that. And he's based in High Wycombe, which is, after all, he ends up there originally so that he's cheek by jowl with Bomber Command, because he needs to, when he arrives in the UK, he needs to pick their brains. He needs to speak to them about their experience and, draw what he can from it. And he's got it. Obviously, the Americans have got their own ideas that they're They're very much into it.
It's well placed actually, because it's about it's about 40 miles from northwest of London.
Yeah.
So that means you're easy access to London if you need to get there, but also it's easy access for him to get to his airfields in the Midlands and East Anglia. It's very well placed. It's actually it was before Wickham Abbey Girls' School, and subsequently became returned as Wickham Abbey Girls' School, but it was codenamed Pine Tree.
Pine Tree, that's right. Yeah. So there's photos. Eaker and Ferret Anderson.
Fred Anderson.
Ferret? It's Ferret.
Ferret Anderson.
I like it.
Yeah, that's just my type.
Eaker and Fred Anderson. We've got photos to look at it. So he's analysing the photos. And they tell the world. I think what's really amazing about this is that, we've just gone through the cost and how bad things are for 8th Air Force. But they tell Hap Arnold the truth, don't they? And General Hap Arnold, who's the next fellow up the food chain, who's in Washington.
Well, he's the commander-in-chief of the Army Air Force.
Exactly. But they tell him, don't they, that all 3 of the buildings have been destroyed.
Yeah.
Right? Arnold is then happy to go out and say Schweinfurt has been completely destroyed. Right? But they know that they can't lose fortresses at this rate. And because they're losing 250 forts and crews per month at minimum. And they say, we must show the enemy we can replace our losses. He knows he cannot replace his. We must continue the battle with unrelenting fury. Right? So they're on the horns of a big dilemma here, because they know they have to do that. They know how difficult that is, but they also have to paint the picture that this is working in order to be able to replace our losses.
Yes, but you can see the doubt in that, can't you already?
Oh, completely.
If Ira Eaker is a really good man. He's a good man. He's clever. He's said, well, we'll get on to him in a minute. But
it's pure projection. That we must show the enemy we can replace our losses. We need to find out if the enemy can replace their losses. We're not sure if he can replace his.
The bombing was pretty accurate, but only 482 tons of bombs were dropped, and a large part of that doesn't hit the Kugelfischer plant, because however big the Kugelfischer plant is, it's not that huge. From 18,000 to 22,000 feet, it's pretty small, and it's really hard to kind of hit something at that, even with the sophistication of kind of Nordon bomb sights and artificial autopilots and all the rest of it. And it is true that output falls by 67%, but they've already got dispersal factories, which is sort of what the British called shadow factories, which is this idea that you have the main plant, but then you have little sub plants all over the place, and they're dispersed all over the place, and they're smaller and they're harder to hit. And
this is a byproduct of the fact that the Germans have been being bombed for 2-3 years now, and they're working out what they need to do to mitigate the damage that can be done.
Well, yes, and there's also a sort of slight question mark over kind of its priorities of target, and absolutely you want to destroy the Luftwaffe, you want to destroy the aircraft industry, but actually what the Luftwaffe is building in vast numbers at this point is fighters, not bombers. Because actually a fighter, although it's an aggressive aircraft, is a defensive aircraft, whereas a bomber is an aggressive aircraft, although it's a kind of feels more lumbering. So that's a kind of sort of the paradox of that. But actually fighters don't require as many ball bearings. So it's a sort of question mark over whether this is a sensible target anyway.
And this is all as a result of 20 interwar arguments within the American air establishment about what you should attack. And the tension between thinkers and
the projection of how air strategy is going to play out and the reality once they're confronted with it. And you cannot blame people, I don't think, too hardly for projecting in the 1930s a vision of air power, because you've obviously got to prepare for the future. But the future is unknowable. You can only make assessments for your best of your judgment.
They're tangled there's a lot of politics around it too, isn't it? Because there's a lot of people who are not interested in the idea of bombing what they regard as civilian areas. You've also there's been a prohibition on the American air establishment for doing any intelligence on how the German economy works at all.
Yes, that is absolutely true.
They make a study of their own economy and extrapolate from their study of the American economy how the German economy must work. And of course, it's a bit different. And so they're hampered by that. And so once the war begins and they're starting to digest the intelligence that the British have got on the German economy and trying to sort of get their thinking around how that works, ball bearings sort of pop up as what, of course, Harris over in Bomber Command would call a panacea targets. But ball bearings, when we talked about it earlier, we said every axle needs a ball bearing. If you pitch it, it's a pretty good idea, isn't it?
So what you're saying is those targets are being chosen through the prism of American industry rather than German industry.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But it's interesting. I think it's worth looking at Ira Eaker because although he's not the most important person in the chain, he is the commander-in-chief of the mighty 8th, of the 8th Air Force. And he is, although what he is doing is projecting a wide-held view amongst the air power elites in the United States Armed Forces, he is very much the intellectual driving force behind the current strategy. And it's worth looking at him. So he's only 47 in October 1943. He's balding, but he's a handsome chap. He's got dark eyes. He's pretty square-jawed. He's resolute. He's brought up in rural Texas. Comes from a very humble background, but he's clever. He's really, really smart. Joins the army, becomes an officer, and then there's a point where he's at the parade ground for the 64th Infantry, to whom he's attached at El Paso in Texas, when suddenly a plane comes in, and the plane is spluttering and all the rest of it, and the pilot doesn't know what to do, but Eaker knows his way around an engine. And realizes that all he needs to do is change a couple of spark plugs. So he changes the spark plugs and the pilot's on his way. But before the pilot gets on his way, he goes, hey, you're good at this stuff. Have you ever thought about joining the aviation section of the Signal Corps? And Eaker thinks, well, that sounds like fun. I quite fancy being a pilot and getting into aviation. So he switches and he becomes quite a pioneer. It's really interesting. All the lead aviator, leading air commanders in the United States Army Air Force by, middle of the war, they've all been pioneers in the 1920s and 1930s.
Hap Arnold was taught to fly by the Wright brothers.
There you are. I
mean, what do you need? Eaker's time when he gets to grips with being an airman is really fascinating because one of the requirements, and I really love this, is one of the requirements at the Air Corps College is that you have to do 25 hours of equine stable management. And you have to do an hour's horseback riding every morning from 7:15 to 8:15. It's required.
Okay. Why?
Because that's just the way it's been set up, all right? And the riding requirement, they spend more time on horseback than they do addressing themselves to air logistics and stuff like that. Tammy Davis-Biddle is very funny about this. The riding requirement was increasingly resented as the years passed. and there's Lieutenant Colonel E.L. Hoffman writes the school's commandant in 1935 saying, "I've never liked a horse nor admired one except at a safe distance. I fail to see that horses have any place in the science of aviation." His request is denied. And then in the Air Corps newsletter, Eaker himself explains the present class has suffered 5 major casualties from riding to date, including broken bones, an arm, a leg, and miscellaneous ribs.
God, it seems absolutely mad.
There's considerable agitation on the part of the present class to make riding optional.
And they do eventually, presumably.
Well, the student council has recommended that the tactical school cavalry be placed high on the Army's priority list for early mechanization.
God, you think the British Army is the one stuck in the mud. I mean, honestly.
Well, isn't that interesting? Because you've talked about Sherwood Range Yeomanry being on horseback in Palestine in 1939.
Yeah.
And by the end of the war, they're total mechanized bad boys. There's Ira Eaker sat on some pony somewhere.
One looking wistfully up at the sky.
Come on, guys, we've got to do this hour's riding. Then we can talk. Then we can talk about precision.
Then we can get into our kites. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, that's absolutely amazing. Anyway, so Eaker, like a lot of these guys, does a lot of sort of pioneering work, and they're real adventurers and unbelievably courageous because this is the first time things have been happened. So with his great mate Bill Kepner, he becomes the first pilot to fly blind across the US.
Absolutely
so instruments
amazing.
Only. Hood over the canopy.
Hood on the canopy. Yeah, absolutely incredible.
That requires sort of nerves of steel to do that. So it's not. When they're commanding these guys and sending them into battle in 1943, it's not like they haven't been tested in terms of sort of courage and personal bravery themselves. They absolutely have. And by 1939, Eaker is in Washington as the XO, which is the executive officer, which is sort of effectively second in command or sort of chief, number 2, to Major General Hap Arnold, who at that point is the Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Army Air Corps, as it then is, not an Air Force at that point, and Brigadier General Carl Toohey Spots is the Chief of Staff. So that makes Eaker effectively number 3. And he's also collaborated on a very successful book with General Arnold, Hap Arnold, called Winged Warfare, which is actually done very well, and again is a kind of sort of, this is a kind of a vision of the future of what air power is going to be like and all the rest of it.
Yeah. And he's studied the Spanish Civil War with Arnold as well. They've got another book called This Flying Game, which they've written together, where obviously air combat and where the question of what you do with your air power is played out in public. So do you use it as a tactical air force because it is used as tactical air power by the Germans with the nationalists, or do you use it as for bombing towns? Guernica famously being the globally famous example. And so that's what they're looking at. And they're as you say, they're right. So they're writing books together. They're doing their thinking together. So everyone's hugger-mugger on intellectually on the tasks ahead. The tasks that they they don't hope, they imagine, they expect. Because after all, a big thing they're up against.
This is all theoretical at the point.
It's all theoretical, and they're seen as warmongers. If they say, by the way, we may have to bomb somewhere, in isolationist America, it's not the easiest of wickets to be defending, is it?
Yeah.
Or even sketching out, or even inventing. I mean, it's extraordinary. Anyway, go on.
Yeah. So I think leading off what you just said, I mean, air power is in the 1920s and 30s. A huge amount of thought has been given to this by the men in the comparatively very small US Army Air Corps. But these guys know they're this little sort of band of brothers, and they, regardless of how isolationist America is, at some point they might be called upon, and they've got to think about this stuff. And
also they're arguing that it's a cheaper way of defending America's coast.
Absolutely.
Than naval power.
Cheaper and less costly in terms of men's lives, because although we always sort of think it's France and Britain that have been completely damaged by the Duke forces that have been damaged by the First World War, don't underestimate how much the losses in 1918 have affected American public opinion, and it's one of the reasons why they've led to isolationism and all the rest of it. And everyone is very mindful that you cannot have the slaughter of the trenches again. That has to be avoided at all cost.
Well, and but there are bomber campaigns that people can examine, and so the British and the French have attempted to bomb Germany in different ways, shapes, and forms, and the Germans, of course, have bombed Britain. And there are some conclusions you could draw from those bombing campaigns that, of course, that sort of hang heavy. And Trenchardian doctrine, the founder of the Royal Air Force, right, who's the guy who takes the RFC and turns it into its own arm on April the 1st, 1918, his thing is the total offensive all the time, that you're at the enemy the entire time.
With lots of bombers.
Lots of bombers, and you push. And that's a very attractive idea to this bomber mafia that develops. They really love that idea. But the reality of the bomber, for instance, the bombing campaign over Britain in the First World War is that the pursuit fighters, interceptor fighters, defending fighter aircraft, force that campaign to work at night. Because daytime is too difficult, because the fighter ends up quicker than the bomber and able to overwhelm the bomber no matter how well the bomber can defend itself. And so what's really interesting is they look at that, they see that, that's the example, and the British are also chewing on that gristle at the same time.
Yep.
And the Americans conclude, actually, no, you know what? A fast enough, high-flying enough, well-defended enough bomber is actually the answer.
Yeah, and there's two people we should mention here. We should mention Giulio Douhet, who is the Italian thinker who writes Command of the Air in 1921, and it becomes this incredibly influential kind of treatise on the future of air power, which is all about bombing. But in the United States, it's Billy Mitchell. So Billy Mitchell ends the First World War as a commander of the US Army Air Operations, and then post-war becomes Assistant Chief of the Air Service. And he's incredibly outspoken, and he absolutely zealously believes in the importance of air power, of bombers, and is really, really against any kind of isolationism whatsoever. Not so much isolationism in terms of foreign policy, but isolationism in terms of not providing sufficient defense for the nation.
Yeah.
That's his big point. He's not a warmonger. He's just saying we need to be prepared. And he's so outspoken, he actually accuses the War and Navy departments of treason for not taking the build-up of air power seriously enough, and then gets court-martialed. He gets court-martialed. His career's over. Resigns from the air service. He continues to rant and rave, but it breaks him. And he dies very young in 1936. But Mitchell's preachings are absolutely haven't fallen on deaf ears. And they become very much the kind of baseline for this emerging new leadership within the United States Army Air Corps, of Spots, of Eaker, of men like Jimmy Doolittle, Barney Giles, these kind of guys, and of course Ira Eaker himself, who absolutely are taking the United States Army Air Corps into the new war that emerges in September 1939.
Well, and part of the tension within the debate in America is that the Hague Conventions of 1922-23, that's when they're drafted, get stuck on the definitions of what constitutes a legitimate military target in an age of total war. And so this debate that Mitchell's trying to propel in public runs into, obviously, inevitably, and we see it today, runs into that question. What is a legitimate military target in a time of total war? If your aim is to eliminate the enemy, and they do conclude that what they've got to do is eliminate the opposing air force, because that's Trenchard's thing too, is that you eliminate the enemy's air force and then you have freedom of action, is the idea. But basically, they get stuck on this, and from this comes the need for the Nordon bomb site and for precision bombing, which is the thing that is essentially, if you want a two-word thing to hang on the American campaign, and you can hang it on as an intention or an ironic label, you can address the American campaign through those two words, and that's precision bombing discuss. Could be the title of this series of podcasts. They really do think they really can do that. They really do want to do that intentionally.
Well, you see these ideas developing over the course of the 1920s.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But that's all those ideas that sort of arrive at through the prism. And I think what's so interesting about this, Douhet wasn't talking about precision bombing, and of course there's no evidence that any of these people actually read him. He put bombing into the ether as the idea to discuss for the next war.
Yes, but it's so fascinating how they come to this conclusion, though, isn't it? Because the conclusion of high-level precision daylight bombing comes at the end of the 1930s, and you've got this sort of little hub of the Air Corps, this tiny little component of the United States Armed Forces, which are also, with the Navy accepted, the Army is also tiny in the 1920s, and this is all based at Langley Field in Virginia, and it's the Air Service Tactical School, which is founded in 1920, becomes the Air Corps Tactical School in 1926. And this is effectively the Air College, and all these guys are passing through this area. They're all meeting each other, flying, going horse riding, whatever. But they're also kind of doing lots of chit chat. And one of the kind of the divergent views is from Claire Chennault, who
she's fascinating.
Finds fame as the Flying Tigers, mercenary force in China, in Chiang Kai-shek's China in 1937 onwards. But he's a pursuit man. And fighter planes in America are called pursuit planes, which is why they have the prefix P47, P38, P51, all the rest of it. It comes from that nomenclature. And his tenets are, one, that the pursuit aircraft always can stop bombers if there's enough of them and given enough warning. And that bombers flying deep into enemy territory need friendly fighter escort. On both things, he is absolutely correct.
He says, Jim, he observes that the bomber ought not to be made the first exception to the ancient principle that for every weapon there is a new and effective counter-weapon.
He's absolutely
right. And I think what's so interesting is that for a very long time, and we'll see why, because the aircraft that makes this thinking all seem to make sense when it comes along is an extraordinary bit of kit. In 1936, they cling on to the idea that the bomber. And it's more than Stanley Baldwin saying the bomber will always get through. They're basically saying, we've found a way for the bomber to always get through. And this bomber will always get through.
This bomber with this equipment. And this is what's coming out in the 1930s. And it's fascinating because Chennault is listened to, because they do have fighter planes.
They do nevertheless commission fighter aircraft, pursuit planes.
They do.
Yeah.
So it's not if it's without, but the preeminence of the bomber over the pursuit aircraft absolutely comes to the fore. And Chennault gets so fed up with not being listened to or seemingly not being listened to that eventually he does go off to China in 1937. But by this point, you're absolutely bang on. I mean, what they're doing is they're developing this technological advancement.
Yeah, but in an ideological environment that's a result of a vacuum of any experience, and there is an experience of bombing, but they've gone, no, we've solved that problem. We've solved that problem. And in their debate, they say if bombing missions have been flown properly, and Trenchard says this too, if bombing missions have been flown properly, then they would have had the effect. If only it had been committed to properly in the First World War, it would have worked better. And that's what we can learn from. That's what we can learn from that experience, is it wasn't done properly, which is a little like people, with the Soviet Union going, well, socialism wasn't done properly.
When you hear that, you never get the perfect
which is where you end up with ideology when there's literally a vacuum of experience to draw on. But I think what's really, you struck on something really, really interesting there, because the bomber people think they're hard done by and think they can't get their way. And yet, if you're a pursuit guy within the US Army Air Corps, you think you're not getting your way, and you are not prioritized. So there's this very peculiar distortion that people actually running the US Army Air Corps and then the US Army Air Force, they are in favor of the bomber. They actually have won the argument. It's then the argument of the execution that becomes the problem, and yet they portray themselves as the people always having to make the argument, who've lost the argument and have got to do ceaseless advocacy. But actually, by the time the war begins, they have won. The bomber people have won the argument, which I think
they have. But they've been able to do this through the advancement of technology. And what we normally think of it is wars that accelerate technological development. What is really interesting about America and isolationist America in the 1920s and 1930s is that it is America's technological advancement and commercial advancement, civilian commercial advancement in the 1920s particularly, but then into the 1930s, that leads them to the bomber mafia, the bomber men, to develop the way they do. Because what is happening is commercial civilian aviation is taking on a huge leap.
Well, safer than military aviation, and there's a scandal within the Army Air Corps about that crash rates and unreliability are off the charts compared to commercial aviation. So you've got the automobile industry, you've got genuine mass production as well,
genuine civil aviation production, and what that's leading to is the death of the biplane and the development of the stressed metal aluminium monoplane. And out of that comes remarkable aircraft that are starting to emerge in the 1930s, and not least the Boeing 247, which first flies in 1933. It's got retractable undercarriage, can fly at 200 miles an hour. The DC-3 comes in 1936. And anyone looking at these aircraft is looking at a vision of the future. They're stressed metal, they're silvery, they kind of twinkle in the sunlight as they fly over California.
The DC-3 has, swept wings,
swept-back wings, and all the rest of it. Yes, so this is these are really pioneering, and they look about as far removed as when you look at an old biplane, it really looks old and old-fashioned and First World War-y and sort of a different era. When you're looking at a DC-3, you can absolutely see the lineage to a kind of a Boeing 747 today. It's not that much of a stretch. So U.S. private commercial business is sort of helping the United States economy kind of emerge from the sort of catastrophic economic depression. But it's also showing the bombermen a way forward. So in 1934, the War Department issues a procurement brief for a new multi-engine bomber. It needs to be capable of 200 miles an hour. It needs to be able to fly for 10 hours. And it needs a bigger payload than anything that's come before. So, big firms, Douglas, Martin, Boeing, they all compete. And because the Vincent Trammell Act that we talked about in earlier episodes, which is this thing that any development has to be developed privately under your own thing with no government funding, it hasn't happened yet. So they have to do it at their own expense. There is a kind of sort of fly off at Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, but by that point it's a kind of it's a done deal, because the Boeing effort is the Model 299. Which first flies on the 28th of July 1936 from its base in Seattle, which is where Boeing is still based, incidentally. It's got an internal bomb bay. That's brand new. Normally you just hang a bomb off the bottom of the fuselage, but this has got an internal bomb bay. It's got pretty much retractable undercarriage. It's even got air brakes. And this is the key thing, it's got an automatic pilot that can keep it flying straight and level during a bomb run. It's got 5 machine guns protruding. Which is why reporters seeing it goes, "Way, it's a flying fortress," and the name sticks. And also has a top speed of 252 miles an hour.
For 1936, is phenomenally fast.
Fast and powerful. And it's got 4 engines rather than just 2.
Yeah. So they've got the plane, they've got the bomb sight,
which is the Nordon bomb sight, which is this amazing thing, which is developed by a Dutch emigre called Carl Nordon.
Yep.
And it's it's absolutely incredible marvel of modern technology and science, because it enables a bomb aimer to look at the target through the eyepiece and accurately compute the aircraft's ground speed and direction. And then, after taking into account the weight and size of the bombs that they've got on board, calculate exactly when to release them to achieve the best accuracy. And this is the really big thing, and you can later see the development of this in tanks, in the Sherman tank, for example. It's got gyroscopic stability, which is just off the radar, kind of modern
sci-fi.
and
sci-fi.
Wow, it's sci-fi stuff. I mean,
sci-fi.
20 years before, you're kind of flying around in kind of stressed Irish linen and wooden struts, and now you've got kind of gyroscopic stable bomb sights. I mean,
and that bomb sight works really, really well in the skies of mid-America on a clear June day. But
yes,
I mean, it is very interesting, isn't it? Really, basically, this is a think tank. We're talking about a think tank. And
of like-minded souls, all hanging out at Langley Field.
With not with a blank check, but with money, actually with quite a lot of money to spend on itself, who nevertheless are chewing their teeth and spitting and wailing and saying they aren't getting enough of what they want and all this sort of stuff, which I think is very, very interesting. And it's, when we started talking about these guys, it's a testament to the lobbying power of these lads. People like Tui Spots as well, who's really, really, really wedded to this idea that the American bomber force, when the moment comes, will be absolutely decisive. And he's an ex-fighter pilot, so it's interesting that he's sort of switched into bombing. Although maybe,
the other thing about all these guys, though, all these guys are just so smart. I mean, they're really clever. They're incredibly experienced. They've all been part. Spots is another one who's a pioneer. He set an endurance record of remaining airborne for 150 hours, thanks to air-to-air refueling, which again is another kind of sort of pioneering bit of science which is being developed in the United States. He's helping to develop the B-17 and later the consolidated B-24 Liberator. He's got a year at the Command and General Staff School. These guys are serious players. I mean, they're constantly thinking about this stuff. They're smart, they're urbane, they're well read, and they know that they are leading lights on new, potentially very exciting technology, which could potentially save an awful lot of young Americans' lives. And I think that is the kind of the number one driving force, that there is this panacea that can take them into a new era of fighting.
This is driven by faith in technology, faith in the ideology, and a zeal to win a war by saving as many, in a way, save as many lives as you possibly can to do it.
Yes, and I think it's really important to say to mention that the United States Army Air Corps is only 17,000 strong in September 1939, but the big change happens when Roosevelt in the summer of 1940 says we're going to be building 50,000 aircraft a year, and suddenly that's massive. And all the airmen are sent over to Britain to observe the Battle of Britain and the Night Blitz and all the rest of it. And they are, you get this sense that from 1940 onwards, they are really, really ratcheting up the tempo and are going to, air power is absolutely going to be at the heart of any future military operations that the United States undertakes.
And there's the old expression, isn't there, that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And we started this with the Schweinfurt 2. I mean, essentially a reduction to non-combat effectiveness of US 8th Air Force. These are the good intentions that lead to that raid we described in the first half of this episode, that are at the heart of the American bombing campaign. Obviously, this is a series of episodes. We've lots more to say. Thanks for listening to this one, part one. And if you can't wait to hear the next episode, you can hear our whole series right now. Search for us on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to our channel for every episode now. Plus, get this, finally, curated playlists of the best series from the last 4 years. Stuff divvied up into its subject so you can find it easily. Dunkirk, D-Day, Arnhem, maybe? Or become a member of our independent company with live streams and book deals on patreon.com/wehaveways. None of it for more than the price of a pint or two. We'll see you very soon. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Cheerio.